Hey guys, welcome into our last edition of Boomer Breakdown for 2021. Oklahoma ends the season with a 47-32 victory over Oregon. Excuse the banner here, it should say Oregon, not Oklahoma. Over Oklahoma. Let me fix that while I'm talking here. So I know it's late, so I appreciate you guys jumping on or just saying just hoping and assuming that there's going to be a lot of people jump on. So a lot of things to talk about. For Oklahoma in this game, lots and lots of positives, I think. But then they made it interesting, like they have pretty much every every game in the 2021 season. It was interesting to say the least. But I think the first half was certainly the best half of football that Oklahoma played all year, bar none. Offense was really played well for the entirety of the game. Defensively, they got caught in some kind of miscommunication situations there in the third quarter, and even some in the fourth quarter got beat deep a few times. DJ Graham specifically a couple of times himself. There was one miscommunication, I think, situation with Woody Washington as well. But offensively was consistent. Um, all game, Caleb Williams, 21 out of 27, 242 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Had the one fumble, but got back on it quickly. The running game was the best that it's looked all year. 43 carries for 322 yards. It's hard to lose games when you run for over 300 yards. Hard to lose games when you run for over 200. But specifically, if you're able to run for over 300 yards, it's really, really difficult to lose games like that. And Oklahoma dominated the line of scrimmage, at least on the offensive side, pretty much throughout the game. Like I said, 322 yards. Kennedy Brooks, 14 carries, 142 yards, 3 touchdowns. Eric Gray, 8 carries for 82 yards, his best game as a Sooner running the football. And then we even saw Marcus Major sighting, had 10 carries for 54 yards, ran really tough between the tackles, especially late there in the game. So receiving, Jalil Farouk was actually the leading receiver for Oklahoma, 3 catches for 64 yards. Marvin Mims, 2 catches for 57 yards. Had that 55-yard touchdown pass, or touchdown reception, I should say. Mario Williams had 2 catches for 33 yards. Could have been a lot more. Had that face mask penalty against the Oregon defender where it ripped his helmet off. Could have scored a touchdown on that play. Kind of give an asterisk by that, by those stats as well. Then Eric Gray had a touchdown reception, 5 catches for 25 yards. And then obviously, just a great moment for Oklahoma and Bob Stoops and Drake catching that touchdown pass early in the game. So with his one catch for that 6-yard touchdown pass reception. So really good performance overall, considering what was going on within the program over the last month. Bob Stoops taking over, and really just a memorable night for him, for his family, for the Oklahoma program. Really, just kind of in a transition period. So having a guy like Bob Stoops, I think it's gonna create big, huge dividends for this team. Not only next year, but the years following, and on how well he was able to bridge that gap. Not necessarily just with this game, but his ability to keep some of the recruits in house, along with Venables coming in and kind of securing and bringing even some of those that left coming back. And then just what he was able to do, keeping the wheels on the bus, and even getting to a position where Oklahoma did as well as they did in the early period from a recruiting perspective from 2022, and then obviously playing well in this game. So a lot of off-season questions, so we can kind of get to that. Obviously, um, you've got a few things. If you're obviously the lull of the going from the off season begins now, but you've got when you look at Oklahoma, they've got a couple of on field defensive assistants to hire, from a defensive back perspective, a cornerbacks coach and a defensive line coach, and we'll get into that on some of the guys that I think that will. That have a good chance there. Two really big hires, specifically as we looked at how the secondary played, not only through the year but tonight. I think that's going to be both of those hires are going to be very crucial. for Oklahoma. And then you kind of get into some of the recruiting in the late signing period, and then that takes obviously Oklahoma into the spring practice and the spring game in the the March April timeframe. So a lot to look forward to, a lot to talk about, and then you've got the decision for some of these players, whether or not they'll whether or not they'll stay within the program, whether or not they'll go pro. There's some talk about some that may leave. I think Kennedy Brooks is probably top of mind in terms of whether or not he will decide to stay, um, will stay or come back. But it's a tough one for me. I mean, I can see a situation in which um, I can see a situation in which he would probably he could definitely come back, get a little bigger and stronger, as they mentioned on the broadcast. But I'm not sure how much another year would improve his draft status. So not sure what that looks like. So I think he had mentioned that he would start kind of addressing that here pretty quickly after the bowl game was over. A lot of discussion about Caleb Williams. Venables actually took the microphone a little bit in the post game and really talked about Caleb Williams leading this team in the future, leading this team next year. So I would be extremely surprised if he's not part of this Oklahoma team next year and the following year as well for Oklahoma. So I know a lot of people would have liked and would have expected, and maybe he will at some point here tonight, but expected him to come out and talk about being part of this team, being part of this program moving forward. But I think he will. I would be, like I said, it would be a major shock to me if he is not part of this team next year. So I think that's you talk about that. Braden Willis is another guy on the offensive side of the ball that um, that you think about that he could possibly move on. Great blocker. I don't think he got an opportunity to get utilized as well as maybe he could have um, this year. So would be interesting to see what what he looks like. Thought the play calling by Cale Gundy was just excellent all game long. Um, I think he was very insistent on running the ball. Oklahoma ran the ball 43 times, passed the ball 27. A much better split than we saw with Riley a lot of times this year. So thought he did an excellent job, calling the plays. I thought Odom had a great first half. Maybe not as quite as good on the second half. Got a little bit of that Alex Grinch hesitancy in terms of it wasn't really willing to bring as much pressure in the second half, and I think that costs Oklahoma. Just Oklahoma hasn't been great in the back end all year long, and when Oklahoma has brought pressure, they've been a little bit more successful, and when they haven't, those guys are kind of sitting ducks, no pun intended, on the back end. So luckily, we got a guy as the head coach that specializes in that from a defensive side of the ball. So I think the one thing that's going to be very interesting in this offseason is what is the impact that Schmidt's going to have on this team. It was very clear in this game again, which has been a very consistent theme all year long, with the weak link for Oklahoma being that defensive line, particularly in the middle, just being not as heavy, not as big, not as physical as they needed to be. So I think we'll see a big change in that. So really interested to see what an off season with Schmidt coming in right away, specifically in the spring, and how that try and translate to the summer and fall conditioning, and and all that good stuff. I think it's going to be. You might even see a couple people leave the program just based on how tough he is compared to what's been out there before. So a lot of things to talk about, whether you want to talk in depth about this game, talk about some of the late recruiting things as well for Oklahoma, some of the guys that Oklahoma are in on. If you want to talk a little bit about the coaching changes, where I see Oklahoma probably going from a defensive line and a defensive back coach for Oklahoma. I think either uh, and then we can get into even early next season stuff. Anything that you're interested in? What are some areas of focus that you think this team needs to have? What are some areas on the team? Obviously, we don't necessarily know with who's coming back and who's Oklahoma going to bring in from a transfer portal, and then obviously a recruiting side just to see exactly what the makeup of this team will look like just yet. But some of the areas, that you guys might be interested in. So whatever you guys want to start with, I'll go ahead and start, and then we can kind of go from there. Just looking to see if there's any breaking news from any players or um, anything like that from the post game here on the Twitter sphere. I've not really seen anything right now. So yeah, like I said, very good performance. I mean, it's always great to end with a win. Oklahoma did a really good job Oklahoma did a good job of doing what they needed to do to give a positive feel to this offseason based on where they're based on where things were at about a month ago, versus where things are at right now. I think will be um, I think will be interesting. Um, I'll kind of talk through some things, and then if you guys have some questions. So Jay, get the first question here. Biggest question: Brooks staying or leaving? Yeah, I think that's the biggest one on the offensive side of the ball. Um, I don't think it's as cut. I don't think it's really cut and dry. I think you see a guy. They talked a little bit about it on the broadcast. Incredible vision, very very patient. He's got that for him. He's not as explosive as some other guys. He's not as big and strong as some other guys. So he's not going to be a guy that's really going to impress in sort of a combine type situation. So I definitely could see him coming back and improving himself from a strength and a speed perspective. Maybe Jeff Levy's able to do some things that really kind of some things that he likes to be part of this team next year. I think when you look at the running back situation, Jay, Oklahoma has an opportunity to be really really good, especially if he comes back. You've got just for arguments purposes, just assuming that he comes back, you have him, you have Eric Gray, you have Marcus Major that will be here. Then you have Gavin Sawchuk that's already committed, and things are looking like Oklahoma might get Javante Barnes, who's a running back out of Las Vegas, who's been really tight with DeMarco Murray through this process as well. So I don't. I think that it could help his stock a little bit just from just kind of piggyback on your next question, Jay. I think it could help his stock from a strength and a speed perspective. This Oklahoma team has some talent. You can see that Oklahoma um, played really well in this game on the offensive side of the ball. Then you can make the argument that if Oklahoma has coaches that are completely dedicated to him, to not only him but the team, what can they do with that? So I think that will be really interesting to look at for next year. Yeah. Um, yeah, DJ got roasted. It was very, very strange, Monty, and thanks for the comment there. I haven't seen he hadn't played that poorly all year. In fact, he got benched in the last part of the fourth quarter there for Jaden Davis just because he continuously got beat. I tweeted out that he's got a season full of film just in one half of play to help him get better next year, so he could learn some things. So I think, as bad as that was for him and the team in the second half, I think, I think it will be good for for his maturity and next year, and just seeing exactly where where he's able to go from there. So love Marcus Major, sorry. Feel like he's very much in the mold of a Trey Sermon, very much in the mold of Ramondre Stevenson, who is a guy that maybe he's not necessarily your starting running back, but is also a guy that you can use late in games to be sort of a closer type situation that you will. That you'll see. So I think he'll be a major factor in what Oklahoma is going to do next year. I think he's probably a better running back than Eric Gray, just from a straight running the ball, whereas Eric Gray catches the ball out of the backfield a lot better. Really excited to see what Levy can do with Eric Gray, and also and also Mario Williams tweeted that out as well. Just so excited to see what Levy will be able to do with him. A lot of motion, a lot of jet sweeps that he employs in his offense. So you'll certainly see him. I think really excited to see what he'll do. I think he'll have a great season for Oklahoma next year. Um, hey, Hartley's. I think you absolutely will see Caleb Williams next year. It's not really even something that I'm really worried about at all. So Scott, good question. What defense will we run next year? Our current personnel, I think we've got a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. The one thing that you can say about Alex Grinch and even Roy Manning and the defensive staff and Riley to that extent is they've been able to recruit really well over the last couple of years. So I think the talent is there. It's really just getting them from a body perspective to be the right way. I think the one thing that you can count on is that Venables defense is going to be incredibly aggressive. They're not going to do a lot of what you saw out of Grinch, and they're not going to do a lot of just sitting back and letting these teams either run the ball or do what they're good at, right? I mean, you're going to see a lot of blitzing. You're going to see a lot of pressure on the quarterback. You're going to see a much more fundamentally sound defense in terms of open field tackling, um, and things like that. So I think everybody's going to be proud of what the defense is going to show next year. It may not necessarily immediately be a top 25, top 30 defense, but I would be shocked if this team isn't much better on the defensive side of the ball next year. Jay, and I think very good point. I think Eric Gray, he's not a terrible runner. He ran the ball pretty well, probably his best game as a Sooner running the football tonight. His longest yard or his longest carry tonight came. I think he had like 50 yards. Excuse me, guys. 50 or 60 yard carry on there in the third quarter. So yeah, um, I think he uh, can run the ball, but I think it could be interesting if they move him around a little bit, let him play running back, and then let him play in the slot a little bit more. I think Oklahoma will certainly have the ability to have more options. I think Oklahoma was hamstrung a little bit early on with just having Eric Gray and Kennedy Brooks, and not wanting to get either of those two kids injured as well. Yeah, definitely noticed that. Love the leadership that he has as a true freshman, and it's only going to get better. I agree with everything that you're saying here. That was one of the things that initially kind of sparked my eye with him, and just what he was able to do. Um, for from that leadership perspective, you could see that he clearly won over the team. Has heard some things earlier on in the year, just in terms of he may have been a kid that a lot of people thought it was going to be hard to keep him off the field day one. He was that good early on, but I think you'll see a lot of maturation from him here in the offseason. Not a big fan of Andre Ware, but he even talked about that a little bit on the broadcast um, tonight, just in terms of just what his maturation will be able to do to see the field a little bit better, watch routes develop a little bit more, quick reads, finding that open receiver a little bit faster, and going through the progression a little bit quicker. So I think you'll see, that a little bit accentuated here next year as well. Um, so think. Martin, man, thanks for coming in late tonight. I appreciate you guys. Hey, we've got like 90 on the broadcast right now, so you guys share, hit the like button, tell your friends and um, friends, family, coworkers, whoever, to come jump on here. Especially if you're off work and you don't have to do anything tomorrow. Sleep in. I don't think the first game's until like 10:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. So sleep in and come join us and let's talk about this. So what am I hearing from the D line and the DB coach? So I think from a D line perspective, for everything that I'm hearing, I think it's really down to two guys. I think you've got Todd Bates, who's the current defensive line coach at Clemson. I think he's a guy that has already received a call. If not, gets a very, very strong look. But the other guy is Trey Scott, who is the defensive line coach at Georgia. I think both of those guys would be great fits for Oklahoma. I like Personally, I like Todd Bates a little bit better. Martin, the reason why I like Todd a little bit better, he's an absolutely dynamic recruiter. A couple of years ago, he was voted as the recruiter of the year in all of college football. Great coach, knows Venables really well. Has been with Venables for quite some time. I like him. But Trey Scott, comes from it coached at Georgia, has a good pedigree there as well. So I think it's down to those two. I would probably lean slightly towards Bates in terms of who I would like the most or who I, kind of hope, gets the job. From a secondary DB coach, I think there's three guys that Oklahoma's looking at. All of them are involved in the playoffs right now. So you've got Jamil Ade, who is the DB coach at Georgia. You've got Jay Valai, who is the DB coach at Alabama, and you've got Steve Clinkscale, I'm sorry, who's the DB coach at Michigan. All three would be great. I think Valai is the best. I think he's the best guy that he comes with a pretty high price tag. Really great recruiter, knows the area well, knows the Texas area well. Obviously, he's the DB coach at Alabama right now, so great. Comes from a great program, but knows the area, is familiar with Venables as well. So he's probably the guy that I would say would be the leader in the clubhouse, just based on just based on what he knows, just based on where he's at, his familiarity with the area, and things like that. So I like Bates and Valai are my two leaders, but at this point, who knows? Wouldn't be surprised. I definitely didn't see, the defensive coordinator, which is really Ted Roof in name only, being that guy, but yeah, I think those are the five guys that I think. Of course, I say this, Martin, and there'll be somebody outside of those five that I'm not thinking through. But those are the five names that I continuously have heard on the defensive line and then the defensive back side as well. Edward, thanks for the comment here. What if Oklahoma did lose to Baylor and Oklahoma State? Oklahoma being playoff look like this. Once the Oklahoma versus Georgia, blah blah blah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a blessing in disguise. If I'm being honest, Edward, I don't know. I don't know what would have happened. I think Riley probably would have taken the job at USC regardless. But maybe it was a blessing in disguise. I truly feel that Oklahoma is going to be better in the future with Venables here, as opposed to the trajectory that Oklahoma had with Riley. I've mentioned this several times, but I'll mention it again. Oklahoma has consistently been in a downward trajectory every year since every new year, I guess I should say it that way, since Riley has been here. first year playoffs, should have beaten Georgia, didn't, but was very obviously very, very competitive in that game. Um, Second year lost to Alabama, was not it wasn't a complete blowout, but was not as competitive as they were against Georgia. Third year, got Oklahoma completely got their doors blown off by LSU. Was not competitive at all from the opening kickoff. Then last year, Oklahoma doesn't even make the playoffs. Still win the Big 12 championship, but doesn't make the playoffs. And certainly this year, Oklahoma doesn't even win a Big 12 championship. Doesn't even get an opportunity to play in the Big 12 championship. So, with all those being said, Edward, in that downward trajectory that Oklahoma was on. I think this was an incredibly soft football team for a majority of the season, and I think that's going to do nothing but change. I see a 180 direction. It's hard to completely change a culture in a year, especially a culture of kind of a country club softness type of culture that Riley had just kind of chipped away at what Bob had built in his 16 years here. But I think having a guy like Bob come in here for the bowl game prep and then transitioning that to Brent, I think will be paramount for the Oklahoma success, and hopefully Oklahoma can get back to that renewed toughness and the suffocating smash mouth defense that Oklahoma played under Venables while he was here. Chad, I definitely agree. Not sure what went into play with Farouk not getting much playing time, but he looked great. He looked. I mean, you have this in a comment here, but watching him, I mean, maybe it has something to do with the number 14, but he did look very eerily similar to Charleston Rambo out there. Like what he did after the catch, making people miss, running tough. There was a couple of situations where he was tackled and he got a few yards after contact, so showed a little bit of toughness there that I didn't specifically know that he had. So Oklahoma's going to be good from a skill position perspective. You're not sure exactly who all Oklahoma will bring in from a skill position perspective, but Oklahoma's pretty much got everybody back minus Hazelwood and obviously minus Stogner from a tight end perspective. But Oklahoma's got a lot of skill position players back, and then they'll get some through the portal as well as they'll get some out of the recruiting cycle. So I like what Oklahoma has there. Preston, how did Major only have 5 carries going to the game, even ineligible the first 6 games? Not like he did practice or no other place. Yeah, it was puzzling, Preston. I think for whatever reason, Riley seemed to hold back on his playing time. I don't know if it was a little bit of a punishment from you know the academic thing that was almost treated like a death sentence, which it shouldn't have been. But yeah, I was puzzled. I thought he specifically down the stretch could have been a benefit for Oklahoma, in the running game. But he ran the ball 10 times today, twice as many as he's had all year. So I like the fact that he got some carries, and he'll be a guy that should be a big contributor to this team next year. Although the offense looked better tonight than they did all season long. Tebow was gone. I see good riddance. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way most people feel, and I'm with you. I think it's a mutual breakup. Obviously, at this point, I think it was at the time, and I think it's definitely there now. You can definitely see that Oklahoma did not lose a beat without Riley there tonight. How would you grade Grimes and Downs? I think they both played well. I think Oklahoma, specifically in the first half, they were getting pressure on Anthony Brown a lot early on in the game. Didn't really play quite as well in the second half overall. But I like both of those kids. They're going to be counted on a lot next year. Both of those Both of those kids are likely starters on this defensive line next year. Who knows who steps up and who Oklahoma gets either from the portal or from the um, in the recruiting side of it. But I think those two kids are going to make a big season, are a big difference in next year in terms of how they played. You saw Clayton Smith get in there a lot on the defensive line. One guy that I thought played really, really well was Marcus Stripling. Had a couple of sacks, really tackled well, played with a lot of anger, played with a lot of just tenacity out there. Love the way he played. So all three of those kids played well, no doubt about that. The one part that I was a little disappointed with was the play of our tackles. Didn't really think that Isaiah Coe or Kelly or Stokes played okay, but didn't think the tackles played really well. Redmond was good, but I think Oklahoma's good. But again, those kids are going to put on some weight. They're going to look a lot different than they did this year. Next year, I think the one thing that has to be glaring to both Schmitty and Venables is, and I'm sure they've watched some tape of Oklahoma defense this year, but just watching that, just seeing Oklahoma get gashed time and time again up the middle. So I think that no more of that speed D will be talked about in Oklahoma, and it'll be much bigger, much more physical type of guys that Oklahoma will have on that defensive line. You'll be better off going to the SEC would be. Yep, I absolutely agree with 100%. Yeah, I very much had compared I very much compared this to Kevin Durant years ago. I don't know if anybody here is basketball fans or even Oklahoma City Thunder fans on how much Kevin Durant was hated. He's still pretty hated, maybe not at the same veracity that he was originally, but I think this is very similar, maybe even worse. Um, you know, for um, for Oklahoma. Oklahoma fans and their hatred for Riley. I think it'll be there for a while. Who the projected stars at safety? It's so early to tell. Next year, I think it'll be interesting to see what Oklahoma does with Key Lawrence. Do they keep him? Um, does he morph back into more of a safety type of player that Oklahoma thought? I think De'Aaron Turner Yale has the opportunity to come back for the extra fifth year COVID year. If he's back, he's absolutely a starter. I think Billy Bowman obviously enters into the conversation, maybe more so at a nickel side. I think Gentry Williams is good enough. If he commits to Oklahoma, he could probably start right away for the Sooners. So I think it'll be interesting to look at. We'll answer that question a little bit more firmly, I think, Scott, come spring. But those are a couple of the guys that kind of come to mind initially. Road clock. What does tonight's game look like if Raleigh's coaching? Does Kennedy Brooks have the same kind of game he had tonight? I think he does. The latter half of that question, I think he does. I think the one thing that was different between Kale and Lincoln's play calling is you saw Kale be a little bit more committed to the run on a more consistent basis than Riley has been willing to be this year. So I think that's the one difference that I would see, that Oklahoma was much more heavy on the run game than so maybe not quite as good of a game, but I think um, you've got to understand that you've got to do what the defense is willing to give you. And it was early. It was pretty clear early on that Oklahoma had the opportunity to run the ball really well. Oklahoma's offensive line, outside of that very first drive of the game, played really well, specifically in run blocking and pass blocking as well. Caleb wasn't really wasn't under a ton of pressure, had some pressure, but no sacks that I remember. And Like I said, ran for over 300 yards. So yeah, I think it would have been interesting to see the difference, but because I think Kale ran the ball a little bit more than Riley had been willing to do this year. Big T 37, thanks for joining. Um, Happy you all got the win tonight. Maybe you guys can finally move forward and stop acting cray. Time to move forward and stop letting Riley live rent free. And y'all say that. Big T, I don't. Are you a USC fan? Not sure. Um, what if you are, or if you're an Oklahoma fan, but yeah, I think it's certainly time for Oklahoma to move on, and I think they are. I think this was the last bit of um, Riley as part of 2021, and now Oklahoma's moving forward as well. So um, obviously, all those speedy coaches are leaving. Yeah, I think it's a it's a very interesting. It's kind of a philosophical question in college football. I wonder. I have my doubts on whether that can work. Um, whether that type of scheme, whether that type of um, just thought process and how you want your players to look and play is is it does it work at the level that you need it to work to win a national championship? And I don't know, and maybe we'll see if that's the case. Maybe specifically at USC when once he gets his guys in there, if that's a defense, I wonder if it's good enough for places like Washington State and really kind of not tr- un, unlike traditional powers that can get the best kids, and you've got to find a way at the Washington State level just to be competitive. Um, and I think that'll be interesting to see as well. But I like where Oklahoma's going in more of a traditional um, defense and being bigger, because that's what you got to do in the SEC. The bigger, stronger, faster. He looked like he was bigger. He definitely did. I don't know if he'd been bulking up, and I don't know that he plays. He didn't play a ton with Benito out there, but yeah, I love the way he played. Jay he played. He was probably the most impressive guy on the defensive side of the ball for me tonight. Bradley Carriger, thanks for. It's amazing how good the offense is when the play caller does completely forget the rushing ball. The thing, glad to see them carry the rock. Um, Absolutely, completely agree with your first point. Running the football, uh, defensive line. I mean, the ends played okay, played pretty. They played decent, good enough. Didn't love the tackle play. Oklahoma got got gashed the middle of the defense all game long. It seemed Travis Dye had over 160 something yards rushing. For Oregon as well. So yeah, I mean, I agree with your first point, but parts of the defensive line played well. What's your percentage chance Caleb comes back? I would say probably in the 95% range that he comes back. I'm just kind of reading some things. Caleb hasn't said anything specifically. Says focuses on his family vacation in the upcoming days. Still would be surprised if he goes somewhere else. I would think at this point um, if he was going somewhere else, I would have expected he probably would have announced it by now. Um, I, again, um, as I mentioned earlier, I don't. I don't foresee him going anywhere. I think he'll be here. I think he'll fit into Levy's offense just fine. Would be very surprised um, if he leaves. Um, yes, Fruit played well. Expect Caleb to enter the. I don't. I just don't. I mean, it's just maybe it's a gut feel. Maybe it's Venables talking about how he's excited to have him come back. and lead this team next year. So um, I don't think he enters the portal. Just my gut feel. Just the whether you want to call it a hunch or a gut feel or just based on what I'm seeing. But I don't see that happening. Uh, so he's multiple, Scott. So I think he does at times. Oklahoma, he has run a traditional tight end or H back, but sometimes he'll. And what go back and look at some of the UCF game film. Go back and look at some of the Ole Miss stuff, and you can even watch Ole Miss and Baylor, and then some of the old Baylor stuff when Art Briles was there. A lot of pre-snap movement, a lot of motion that he does. Really, really fast-paced offense that Oklahoma hasn't ran under Lincoln Riley, but more kind of a Kevin Wilson type of thing, more of kind of a Josh Heupel type of offense as well. Um, so yeah, they do use that traditional tight end, but they're very multiple in the way they attack you. Absolutely. Okay, look, he's a starter. Brooks like he enters the draft. I would probably lean towards you being correct, but I think, but I mean, there's a chance of both of these being wrong, but I think there's a good chance of both of them being right. I agree with you, Bradley. Um, yeah, I think the thought initially, guys, was if Caleb does not come back, or just the thought initially was what Oklahoma had. Um, what does Oklahoma have at the in terms of what kids would decommit, what kids that were in the on this team now will look to go elsewhere. So I think if Caleb comes back and Oklahoma has a lot of these guys back and the recruiting number 10 in the rankings right now has an opportunity to go up here in the late signing period as well, then Oklahoma has a good chance to win the Big 12, especially the way that they finished this year will give them ample motivation. Yeah, completely agree with that, Brandon. I would not have expected him to play in this game if he was, um, if he was not coming back. Was non-committal about the future, but still at the same time, um, I think, I think that is very true what you're saying. Brooks is not projected by the fourth round. He should come back. I think what he'll do, unless he's just made up his mind that he just wants to, he's ready to take that next step in his career, which I wouldn't blame him if he did. He's been in college 4 years. Obviously played the 3 years, all 3 years he was 1,000-yard rusher for Oklahoma and had the COVID opt out year last year, but still has come back from that really strong in a really strong way. So wouldn't be shocked if he just decided, okay, it's time. I'm not getting any younger. Running backs don't have a long shelf life in the NFL, so he'll certainly inquire about what his grade is, um, and then go from there. I would lean towards him leaving. It's just my gut feeling. Same way I feel about Caleb. I don't have any inside information, but I would, I would, I would tend to lean towards him leaving. Let's see. Ali and Caleb is not. I don't think so either. Um, let's hope Caleb a day his family don't vacation in Southern. Yeah, I don't. I really just don't see him going to you. Even if he left, I don't necessarily see him going to USC. I just don't see him following Riley there. They've got an established quarterback, a freshman phenom there as well. So he's pretty much guaranteed the starting spot. There, he'd have to beat out that freshman, which is a sophomore now, will be a sophomore next year for that spot. So, um, yeah, again, I still think he stays. Yeah, Big Hulk. He's a Texas guy, so don't let him. Um, don't let him troll you guys. Caleb Whitman revenge tour for OU beat Florida and Oregon bowl game. Now looking for USC, Boise State, Georgia, Bama for revenge. I think that'd be nice next year. A victory over Georgia or Alabama would be nice because that's probably a playoff game if that happens. He's supposed to be going online here soon. Talking about Caleb, I hadn't heard that exactly. So is that what you mean, Allie? From what we've been through with a good running back in the draft, and it's not that many in this class that is better. He probably yeah, I agree with you. He probably goes. Brooks will be back as well as Major and Gray will absolutely be back. The other ones, I'm not sure. Yep, Salchuk will be here. Maybe Javonte Barnes. I really think Oklahoma's in a good position for him. It's between Oklahoma and USC, ironically enough. But he's talked about how much he really, talking about Javonte Barnes, how much he really values his relationship that he's had with DeMarco Murray. So I think he'll. I would lean towards Oklahoma, but who knows. Okay, Allie, we'll be on the lookout for that either tonight or tomorrow, whenever that happens. Yeah, I think he'll stay, but we'll see what happens. So yeah, definitely. So he would definitely be wise to stay. So we'll still take questions as long we got 108 people on the line here. So bring your questions, comments that you have. It seems like a foregone conclusion, yeah. But until he kind of announces it or doesn't hit the portal, then I think you never know. So Allie, yeah, I talked about Barnes a little bit ago. So if I think Oklahoma will be in a really good spot at the running back position with if they're able to land Barnes, but Javonte Barnes with Gavin Sawchuk. And then at the very least, you have Marcus Major and Eric Gray and possibly Kennedy Brooks. So that's a really, really good stable of running backs for Oklahoma for sure. Matthew, I don't understand. I agree. I agree with you, Matthew. I mean, I think he'd said all along that he was going to watch this play out. Levy's been announced as the offensive coordinator for what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks now. I think if he was really adamant about going somewhere else, I would think that that he would have either decided not to play or either come out tonight after this game and said that he's not going to either not planning to come back. So we'll see. But again, I would have certainly expected him to not be with this team if he had decided. So let's see. Yep, agree. If he was borderline, Caleb wouldn't have bothered playing tonight. All right. Well, I think just the outpouring support that you guys have given this channel all year long is just incredibly appreciated. I've being part of this year has been extremely entertaining, extremely fun. Enjoy doing this with Mark every single week, and then coming on here live, every single Saturday. Obviously, no, today's Friday, but sorry, I don't even know what day it is. I'm in that lull between Christmas and New Year's where I don't even know what day is. So Wednesday night, actually Thursday morning at this point, but like I said, incredibly grateful for you guys making this channel what it is with Mark. Really just decided to start this year. Early in August, we started doing our own, kind of doing our own channel and talked about, having this an Oklahoma channel this year, for game days, and just doing pregame and postgame. And so appreciating you guys being on here, um, and making this what it is. We've had so much to talk about, and then we'll have so much coming up. I'll still be on here every week, talking with Mark, every Wednesday. So make sure you come join us, and like I said, we'll be talking about. I would think over the next couple of weeks we'll have some news on the coaching staff. I think we will, obviously we'll start covering this recruiting a little bit more with the late signing period there in February, and then get spring cranking. There is football has the biggest off season, of any sport in the country, and they but there at least there's plenty of things to talk about with recruiting, and then now the coaching, and just talking about some of those guys that Oklahoma will have, and definitely. So just one last thought here, Jay. Yes, we will absolutely, we'll talk about commitments and any news once Oklahoma solidifies their coaching staff. We'll come on and talk about that, and talk about all the on-field and even some of the off-field coaches, and what that means, and what kind of philosophy of those types of things. And then we'll talk about some of the commitments as well, as they come across. And if it's a big one, we'll go live immediately. If not, we'll wait and just kind of talk about them all. So thank you all for your support. You guys have a wonderful night, a happy new year, and God bless.